There are places in Texas that look completely normal on the surface. Nice streets, friendly neighbors, good schools, people moving in, building homes, raising families. But underneath some of those towns, literally underneath them, something is happening that nobody warned the people who live there. Sinkholes opening without warning. The ground shifting. Entire regions slowly losing the one invisible resource they were built on. Old tunnels, buried chemicals, forgotten geology that never stays forgotten. And in some cases, the people living above it have absolutely no idea. These are 10 Texas places with secrets buried beneath them. Some of these will genuinely surprise you. A couple will shock you. And by the end of this video, you are going to look at the ground beneath your feet very differently. Let us get into it. Starting at number 10. Wink, Texas. Most people have never heard of Wink. It is a tiny town in Winkler County out in West Texas. Population barely over 900 people. Oil country. Flat land stretching in every direction as far as you can see. Life out there moves slowly. It is the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and the biggest news of the week is usually something small and local. But Wink made international headlines twice, for something that nobody in that town saw coming. 2 massive sinkholes opened up just outside of town. And we are not talking about small potholes or minor road damage. The first one appeared in 2002. It was roughly 360 feet wide and 110 feet deep. Think about that for a second. That is not a crack in the road. That is a hole big enough to swallow an entire city block. Scientists studied it. They monitored it. They tried to understand exactly what caused it. Then in 2014, a second sinkhole opened nearby. Nearly as large as the first. 2 massive holes in the ground. Same area. Same quiet town. And geologists discovered that underground salt layers left behind by ancient seas that dried up millions of years ago had been slowly dissolving beneath the surface. Decades of oil drilling in the region had shifted the underground structure enough to accelerate the collapse. The land simply gave way. But here is the part that kept researchers up at night. Both sinkholes were still growing after they formed. A 2016 study found that they were slowly expanding toward each other. If those 2 sinkholes ever connect, the combined collapse could be catastrophic. We are talking about a threat to a local highway, a nearby oil facility, and potentially the town itself. Nobody has been told to evacuate. Life in Wink continues just like it always has. People go to work. Kids go to school. And the ground beneath them keeps moving. That is how it starts with a lot of these places. Not with a dramatic warning. Not with an official announcement. Just silence above a problem that keeps growing below. Number 9. Odessa, Texas. In 2008, residents of Odessa woke up to something they could not explain. A hole had appeared near the edge of town overnight. It was not there the evening before. By the time people realized what was happening, the hole had already swallowed trucks, oil storage tanks, and portions of a road. By the time it stopped growing, the sinkhole was nearly 900 feet wide. In a single day. No earthquake triggered it. No storm caused it. No warning came before it. One moment the ground was there. The next moment it simply was not. Odessa sits in Liberty County in southeast Texas. Like Wink, it sits above old oil and gas infrastructure that had been operating for decades. The underground geology in that area includes old salt domes. These are massive underground formations of salt left behind by ancient geological processes. When the surrounding rock dissolves or shifts over time, the surface above can drop suddenly and without warning. The town recovered. The sinkhole was eventually stabilized and monitored. But the thing about salt dome geology is that it does not stop working just because one collapse already happened. The same forces that created the first sinkhole are still present. Still active. Still reshaping the underground environment beneath homes and roads and businesses. The question for Odessa and for dozens of similar towns across Texas is not whether the ground shifts again. It is when. And that uncertainty is something no homeowner ever fully stops thinking about once they learn the truth about what is underneath them. Number 8. Midland, Texas. On the surface, Midland looks like a success story. It is one of the wealthiest small cities in America on a per capita basis. The oil boom of the last 2 decades turned it into a true boomtown. New homes going up constantly. New restaurants opening. Rapid population growth. People moving in from all over the country chasing jobs and opportunity. By almost every external measure, Midland is thriving. But underneath the city, literally beneath the streets and foundations of those new homes, is a problem that the city has been quietly managing for years. It is called subsidence. As oil and gas are extracted from underground formations deep in the Permian Basin, the land above those formations gradually sinks. It is a slow process. Sometimes it is only inches over the course of decades. But in certain neighborhoods of Midland, the effects are very visible to anyone paying attention. Cracked foundations in houses that are only a few years old. Doors and windows that no longer close properly even in newer construction. Roads that develop unexplained dips and warps without any obvious surface cause. Some homeowners have spent tens of thousands of dollars on foundation repairs only to watch the exact same problems return within a few years because the underlying cause was never addressed. And because subsidence in Midland is directly connected to the oil extraction industry that funds the entire local economy, provides the jobs, pays the taxes, and gives the city its identity, it is not a problem that anyone is particularly eager to discuss out in the open. The city that oil built is slowly and quietly being reshaped by what is happening underneath it. And that tension between economic success and geological consequence is something Midland will have to face more directly as the years go on. If you are finding this video interesting and you want more content like this about places across Texas and the rest of America, subscribe right now. We put out videos like this every week covering the real stories behind cities that the mainstream headlines usually miss. Hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you do not miss what is coming next. Number 7. Baytown, Texas. Baytown is an industrial city just east of Houston sitting along the Houston Ship Channel. It is home to one of the largest oil refineries in the entire United States. For generations, Baytown has been a working-class community built around the petrochemical industry. Good union jobs. Decent wages. A place where people stayed for their entire careers and raised families that stayed after them. The community has real roots and real pride. But underneath Baytown and the surrounding region is one of the most severe subsidence stories in American history. Over the course of the 20th century, parts of the greater Houston and Baytown area sank by as much as 10 feet due to groundwater and oil extraction. 10 feet. That is not a measurement error. That is not rounding up. 10 vertical feet of land gone. Permanently. Entire neighborhoods that were once comfortably above sea level are now sitting below it, protected only by levees and drainage systems and infrastructure that requires constant maintenance and constant investment to keep functioning. When Hurricane Harvey hit in 2017, Baytown flooded severely. And hydrologists who studied that flooding in detail noted that the subsidence made the flooding significantly worse than it would have been even 30 years earlier under the same rainfall conditions. The land is lower than it was. The water has fewer places to go than it used to, and the people who live there often go about their daily lives without fully understanding that the ground beneath their homes is not at the same elevation it was when those homes were first built. That is not their fault. Nobody talks about it directly. But it matters. It matters every single time a storm rolls in off the Gulf. Number 6. Galveston, Texas. Galveston is one of the most historically significant cities in the entire state. It was once the largest and wealthiest city in Texas. A major international port. A cultural center. A place of tremendous civic pride and ambition. Then the Great Storm of 1900 arrived and killed somewhere between 6,000 and 12,000 people in a single night. It remains the deadliest natural disaster in American history. The city refused to die. Galveston rebuilt itself. The residents and city leaders constructed the famous Galveston seawall to protect the island from future storms. And in one of the most remarkable engineering projects in American history at the time, they raised the grade of the entire island, pumping sand and fill material under thousands of structures to physically lift the ground level higher than it had been before. It was extraordinary. It was audacious. And it worked well enough that Galveston survived multiple major storms in the century that followed. But here is what most people who visit Galveston today do not know. The island is still sinking. Galveston sits on a barrier island made of soft sediment. Between natural compaction of those sediments and the regional subsidence affecting the entire Texas Gulf Coast, the island has been losing elevation for over a century. And at the exact same time that the island is sinking, sea level in the Gulf of Mexico is rising. The seawall that was built after 1900 to protect the city is now protecting a city that sits lower than it did when that seawall was first constructed. The margin of safety that the wall provides has been shrinking for decades because the baseline keeps changing. Some projections suggest that by mid-century, significant portions of Galveston could experience regular flooding even without a major storm event, just from tidal and weather conditions that would not have caused flooding in previous generations. The city that survived the deadliest storm in American history is now in a slow-motion battle with the very ground it stands on and with the water that surrounds it on every side. Number 5. Odessa, Texas. Odessa and Midland are often mentioned together as the twin cities of the Permian Basin. They sit close to each other. They share many of the same economic forces. They rise and fall together with the price of oil. But Odessa has its own underground story that goes beyond the subsidence issues affecting Midland. Just outside the city of Odessa there are craters. Not industrial sinkholes. Not man-made holes. These are meteor impact craters, and they are some of the best preserved in North America. The Odessa Meteor Crater Site preserves clear evidence of an ancient impact event that reshaped the local geology thousands of years ago. Most visitors find them fascinating as a natural curiosity, a reminder of cosmic forces that shaped the landscape long before humans arrived. But the more immediate issue underneath Odessa is the same one facing Wink and Midland. Underground salt formations combined with decades of intensive oil extraction have created a geological environment where sinkholes can and do form with very little warning. Several have appeared in and around the city over the years. Some were small enough to repair quickly and quietly. Some were not. The residents of Odessa live above one of the most intensively worked oil extraction zones in the entire world. The Permian Basin produces more oil than most countries on Earth. Every barrel of oil that comes out of the ground is a small change in the structure and pressure of the formations supporting the surface above. Over time, those small changes accumulate. The geology responds. And sometimes the response is a hole in the ground where there was no hole before. Nobody talks about it loudly. The oil keeps flowing. The economy keeps humming. And the ground keeps making its own quiet adjustments underneath it all. Here is a question for you. If you lived in one of these cities and found out about these underground risks, would you stay or would you leave? Drop your answer in the comments below. We genuinely read every single comment on these videos, and the answers people give are always more honest and more interesting than anything we expected. Tell us what you think. Number 4. Houston, Texas. Houston is the 4th largest city in the United States. Nearly 2.5 million people inside the city limits. Over 7 million people in the greater metro area. It is massive. It is one of the most economically powerful cities in the country. Energy capital of the world. A global hub for medicine, for trade, for culture. But Houston is sinking. Not metaphorically. Not as a figure of speech. Physically. Measurably. Consistently. The Houston area has experienced some of the most severe human-caused land subsidence ever documented anywhere on Earth. During the 20th century, aggressive groundwater pumping, pulling water out of underground aquifers to support the region's explosive population growth and industrial demands, caused parts of Houston to drop by as much as 12 feet. 12 feet. Over the course of a century, neighborhoods and industrial zones and major roads that once sat safely above sea level gradually moved below it. The city they call the Bayou City, already famous across the country for its flooding problems, is now sitting in an increasingly difficult position as a result of that sunken ground. When Harvey stalled over Houston in 2017 and dropped over 60 inches of rain in some areas over just a few days, the flooding was historic in scale. But researchers who studied that disaster closely were clear about one thing. The subsidence made it worse. Streets that flooded in Harvey had not flooded in previous storms of similar intensity. The baseline had changed underneath the city, and the flooding followed. Texas has invested heavily in groundwater regulation since the worst of the subsidence era. The rate of sinking has slowed in many areas of the city as a result. But the land that already dropped does not come back. It does not recover on its own. It does not slowly rise back to where it was. Millions of people are building their lives, their homes, their businesses, and their futures on ground that is fundamentally different than it was 100 years ago. And most of them never think about it for a single second on an ordinary Tuesday morning. That is what makes it such a powerful secret. Not that someone is hiding it, but that nobody feels the need to mention it. Number 3. San Antonio, Texas. San Antonio is one of the most beloved cities in Texas and one of the most visited in the entire country. The River Walk draws millions of tourists every year. The Alamo stands as one of the most recognized historical sites in America. The food scene, the culture, the music, the festivals, the weather, it all adds up to a city that consistently ranks near the top of lists for quality of life and desirability. San Antonio has grown into a major American city with nearly 1.5 million residents, and it keeps growing. But underneath the surface of San Antonio and much of the surrounding hill country region is something that makes geologists seriously nervous when they talk about it in detail. It is called the Edwards Aquifer. The Edwards Aquifer is a massive underground reservoir of freshwater running beneath San Antonio and extending across much of central Texas. It is the primary source of drinking water for roughly 2 million people. But the geology above the aquifer is karst terrain. Karst is a type of landscape formed from soluble rock, primarily limestone in this region, that has been slowly dissolved by water over millions of years. The result is a subsurface environment filled with caves, sinkholes, underground channels, and voids that formed as water worked its way through the rock across deep geological time. That karst geology means sinkholes can appear throughout the San Antonio region with very little warning. Every year, new sinkholes open up somewhere in or around the city. Most are small enough that they are repaired quickly and forgotten. But some are not small. Roads have dropped. Yards have opened up. Foundations have cracked in ways that inspectors could not immediately explain. And here is the deeper concern that researchers keep coming back to. As San Antonio's population continues to grow at the rapid pace it has maintained for years, the demand placed on the Edwards Aquifer grows with it. More people means more water needed. More water extracted means more changes in pressure and structure in the underground environment. And more pressure changes in a karst landscape means more potential for the surface above to shift and crack and drop without warning. The city is expanding on top of a geological system that is fundamentally unstable by its very nature. The more people who depend on it, the more complicated and fragile that relationship becomes. Most new residents moving to San Antonio have never heard the word karst. Most have no idea that the beautiful hill country landscape they love is partially a product of a geology that is still actively reshaping itself beneath their homes. Number 2. The Texas Panhandle and the Ogallala Aquifer. This entry is different from everything else on this list. There is no single city to name. There is no dramatic collapse caught on camera. There is no sinkhole photograph that went viral. But this might be the most consequential underground secret in the entire state of Texas and possibly in the American Southwest. The Texas Panhandle sits above the Ogallala Aquifer. The Ogallala is one of the largest freshwater aquifers in the world. It stretches beneath 8 states across the Great Plains, from South Dakota all the way down into Texas. For most of the 20th century, Texas farmers and ranchers pumped from it freely and heavily. The water seemed enormous, inexhaustible, so vast that it felt like it would last forever. It will not. In parts of the Texas Panhandle, the Ogallala has lost more than half its total water volume since large-scale irrigation began in the middle of the last century. In some counties, the water table has dropped by more than 200 feet. 200 feet. That is not a drought. That is permanent depletion of an ancient resource. And unlike many aquifers that recharge relatively quickly when rain soaks back into the ground, the Ogallala recharges at an extraordinarily slow rate. The water currently stored in it accumulated over thousands of years during wetter climates that no longer exist in that region. The current natural recharge rate in the southern high plains section of the aquifer is measured in fractions of an inch per year. The math is brutal and straightforward. We are removing water that took thousands of years to accumulate at a rate that is orders of magnitude faster than the rate at which nature can replace it. The communities and agricultural operations that have depended on that water for 3 generations are beginning to face a reality that was always coming but always felt distant enough to ignore for one more season. Some farms across the Panhandle are already drilling deeper and finding less water than they found before. Some wells that functioned reliably for 50 years are slowing or running dry. The towns of the Panhandle, places like Dalhart, Pampa, Perryton, Hereford, and Plainview, were built on agriculture. The agriculture was built on the Ogallala. And the Ogallala is leaving. This is not a sinkhole you can photograph for the news. It is not a dramatic collapse that shuts down a highway and makes social media react. It is a slow and nearly invisible disappearance of the underground resource that an entire region of Texas was built on top of over the course of a century. And when it is gone, the surface above it, the farms, the towns, the families who have been there for 4 and 5 generations, will have to face consequences that no one yet has a comfortable answer for. Before we get to number 1, if this video has been giving you information you did not have before, hit the like button right now. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people who need to hear these stories, and it takes less than a second. We appreciate every single one. Number 1. The Texas Gulf Coast. Brazoria County, Matagorda County, Jefferson County. This is the number 1 entry on this list because it is not one secret. It is not one geological problem. It is the accumulation of almost every force we have talked about in this entire video, layered on top of each other and concentrated along a coastline that hundreds of thousands of Texas families call home. The Texas Gulf Coast is sinking. Not in one spot. Not in one city. Across a wide stretch of the coastline. Measurably. Consistently. And at a rate that researchers who study it closely describe as alarming. NASA has used satellite radar technology to track land subsidence along the Texas coast with extraordinary precision. The data is not ambiguous. Large portions of Brazoria, Matagorda, and Jefferson counties are among the fastest sinking pieces of land in the entire United States. In some specific locations, the rate of subsidence is more than an inch per year. That sounds small until you calculate what it means over 20 years. Over 50 years. And until you combine it with sea level rise in the Gulf of Mexico, which is also accelerating and which adds its own pressure to the same equation. The communities along this coastline are caught between 2 forces moving in opposite directions simultaneously. The land is going down. The water is coming up. And the people living between those 2 forces often have no clear sense of how quickly that gap is closing. The cities and towns affected by this, places like Surfside Beach, Freeport, Port Arthur, Nederland, and Beaumont, are not abstract dots on a map. They are places where real families live and work and have lived and worked for generations. Port Arthur, Texas, the birthplace of Janis Joplin and a city with deep historical and cultural roots, sits at an elevation that already makes it exceptionally vulnerable to storm surge and coastal flooding. After Harvey struck in 2017, parts of Port Arthur flooded so severely and for so long that residents went weeks without access to basic services. And geologists who study the region note clearly that the ground Port Arthur sits on today is measurably lower than it was when the city was founded. The extraction of oil, gas, and groundwater from beneath southeast Texas over more than a century has gradually and invisibly lowered the surface that nearly 100,000 people call home. Here is the thing that ties this entire list together. The same oil and gas industry that built these Gulf Coast communities, that created the jobs and the tax revenue and the sense of economic permanence that made people confident enough to put down roots, also contributed through the process of extraction to the geological changes now happening beneath them. It is not a conspiracy. It is not the result of negligence by any single company or any single government decision. It is the natural result of a century of intensive extraction in a geologically fragile coastal zone. And the people who built their lives here, the refinery workers, the commercial fishermen, the teachers and nurses and small business owners, the families who have been in Jefferson County for 4 and 5 generations, they are now living with consequences they never fully signed up for and that were never fully explained to them. The ground beneath them carries the weight of 100 years of decisions made by people long gone. And the question now is not whether those consequences are real. The data makes that clear. The question is what happens to these communities as the land keeps changing and the water keeps rising and the gap between where things are and where they were keeps growing. Texas is an enormous state and most of it is stable, vibrant, and genuinely full of opportunity. But underneath the surface, sometimes literally and sometimes economically and sometimes both at once, there are forces at work that do not make the tourism brochures or the real estate listings. Sinkholes forming in West Texas oil fields. Coastal cities sinking toward the Gulf. A panhandle region built on water that is nearly gone. A major American metropolis that dropped 12 feet over a century and flooded worse because of it. These are not reasons to be afraid of Texas. They are reasons to understand it more honestly. Because the places that get blindsided by what is beneath them are almost always the places that never asked the right questions before it was too late. So here is the question we want to leave you with. If you lived in one of these places and you knew everything you know right now, would you stay? Would you leave? Or would you just hope for the best? Let us know in the comments. We will be reading every single one.